All Hit Radio.
Welcome to the X Zone, a place where fact is fiction and fiction is reality. Now, here's your host, Rob McConnell.
It was a cold November day. Flight 305 took flight. A man in a suit in the cabin's low light, with a briefcase of secrets and a bourbon in hand. He passed a note softly. The hijack began. He said, "This ain't a game, there's a bomb in this case. Land in Seattle, do it quiet, no chase." He asked for some cash and for parachutes too, then vanished in darkness like ghosts always do. He said, "This ain't game, there's a bomb in this case. Land in Seattle, do it quiet, no chase." He asked for some cash and for parachutes too, then vanished in darkness like ghosts always do. 200 grand in a knapsack tight. He stepped from the stairs and was gone in the night. No body, no answers, no trail to be found. Just myths in the pines with fate in his hands. Was he a soldier, a rogue, or a man on the run? A master illusion, or just chasing fun? FBI hunted, but never could see the face of the outlaw who dropped from the breeze. He said, "This ain't grain, there's a bomb in this case. Land in Seattle, do it quiet, no chase. Did you live free or lie still below the clouds of the north where the lost legends go?" Some say he made it and lives with a name. Some say he perished and vanished in rain. But Lisa remembers the glint in his eye, the secret he carried, the man who could fly. Now decades have passed, but the tale still remains of a man with a purpose who slipped through the chains. No fingerprints left, no story complete, just echoes of boots in the high mountain sleep. Now decades have passed, but the tale still remains of a man with a purpose who slipped through the chains. No fingerprints left, no story complete, just echoes of boots in the high mountain sleep. Now decades have passed, but the tale still remains of a man with a purpose who slipped through the chains. No fingerprints left, no story complete. Into the arms of the secrets we keep.
Welcome to the X Zone. I'm Rob McConnell for the next 2 hours. How's that? It's a Friday night. I want to share with you for a couple of hours here from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada, which means we're on tonight from 10 p.m. until midnight. If you'd like to send me an email, xzone@xzoneradiotv.com, on all social media sites, Xzone Radio TV. And we're coming to you tonight around the world on the Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, Xzone Broadcast Network, and your hometown radio 1220. That's Classic 1220, CFAJ AM in St. Catharines, Ontario, streaming us on classic1220.ca. All right, tonight on the X Zone Radio Show, this first hour, we dive into one of the most enduring unsolved American mysteries in American history, that is. The 1971 hijacking of Northwest Orient Flight 305 by the mysterious figure known only as D.B. Cooper. But tonight, we're just not going to reconstruct the tale. We're actually speaking to someone who has a very personal connection to the legend. Joining us is Lisa Story, the niece of the man she says was D.B. Cooper. Could she hold the missing link to one of the FBI's most baffling cases? Let's find out, X Zone Nation. Lisa, welcome back to the X Zone.
Hi, thanks, Rob. And I love the note, the song intro. It hit all the high notes of the crime.
Yeah, we'll send a copy of it to you.
Yeah.
All right, Lisa, can you start by telling our audience that has grown substantially since you were last with us, who your uncle was and how you first came to believe he was D.B. Cooper?
Right, so my uncle's name was Walter Recca, and he had been, Special Forces, Army Airborne, Air Force Pararescue, Army Intelligence, and had applied to the CIA, but was denied because while he was going through the background check, and this was during a time in the 60s where, we were in the height of the Cold War, and he spoke Polish and Russian, right? So he took the Army intelligence test, but in the meantime, he also was a bit of a hothead. He was very brave and very patriotic, but he was a hothead. So he shot up somebody's car when they wouldn't move it, and he was rejected, right? So I knew about some of his crimes, and, it was family folklore that he had robbed a Bob's Big Boy and shared some of the money with the pretty young lady who was the manager, and of course D.B. Cooper did the same thing. So we had heard for years about, when we would visit, he would tell us stories about some of his diamond mining escapades and a little bit about his military service, things he was very proud of that he had gotten commendations for. But he never mentioned this particular crime or anything else, but he had been meeting up with some of his former paratroopers and Michigan parachute team friends in around 1999-2000 on an annual basis, and they started sharing stories with each other. They'd get together for the weekend, and one of his friends had been convinced since the night of the hijacking that Walt was the hijacker. And in fact, at the time, he didn't know Walt was living in Washington, working for a company that had a lot of paramilitary contracts with the CIA. So he thought it might be Walt because Walt for years had talked about it's stupid to rob a bank and then ask for a car to the airport and then an airplane to go out of the country. Just rob the airplane and jump out of it.
That made sense.
So he had talked about, yeah, right? You kind of cut down the middleman.
Yeah, sure.
So he had talked about that for years. So when it happened, a couple of their other Michigan parachute friends called up Carl and said, what did Pika do now? Well, his original name was Pika. So but they thought it was him. When they started meeting up again, his buddy Carl just kept pressing him, saying, you're D.B. Cooper, you're D.B. Cooper. And he's like, I'm not. But after a couple years, Walt nearly died of an illness, and then he told Carl, look, I want to tell you everything because I don't want to lie to you, but also I think somebody should know. And so then he started sharing information, and Carl talked to him for quite some time and did several drafts of the book. And Carl sent me those manuscripts. Carl and I had gotten to know each other. He became like an uncle to me as well. And he sent me one of the manuscripts, and it talked about the D.B. Cooper hijacking. And so Walt knew Carl and I were talking about it, but every time we'd visit, I'd ask Walt about it, and he would deny it until about 2011 when a woman named Marla Cooper made national news saying that her uncle was D.B. Cooper. And my uncle thought it was ridiculous, her story, and so he sent me a photocopy of the article quoting her and said, that would make Marla 6 years old, a real live Nancy Drew. And then on the side he wrote, you'd be really proud of Uncle Walt and why they never found fingerprints. And then there was another note on there about the tie coming from a thrift store. So this was 2011. He had been talking to Carl, and Carl had been telling me about it and talking to me since 2008, 2009. And they had recorded their conversations in 2008, 2009. A lot of the information in that recording was not public knowledge. Most people didn't know it, and even some of the books hadn't covered this information until they were released. The interviews with the crew were released in 2012. So then I really started to think, wow, this could be him. I mean, he had absolutely done quite a few crazy things in his life, so it made sense. And then his buddy Carl actually tracked down an eyewitness, which was really interesting.
What kind of man was your uncle? Was he like, well, he must have been adventurous since he was, doing all these things for the government. What was he like? Was he a kind of guy you could crawl up on his knee and tell him your problems? Was he a great family man?
No, he's probably not somebody who would give you a shoulder to cry on, but he would be somebody who'd help you hide a body if you needed to do that, right? I mean, he was a good friend, and he loved his friends, and he was very loyal to them, and they were very loyal to him. He grew up very, very poor in Detroit in an area called the Cass Corridor, and he went to juvie hall when he was 9 and met a guy named Willard who ended up being his friend until they both died in their 80s, right? I mean, he was that kind of friend. You made a friend for life with him. He quit school, dropped out of school. His dad died when he was pretty young, and he dropped out at 8th grade. So he was very intelligent, and he read a lot, but he was not well educated, right? So my mom always said Walt could always get jobs, but he never liked the jobs he got. And he got into some trouble as a juvenile, and judge told him join the military or go to jail, and he didn't want to go to jail, so he joined the Army paratroopers. And from then on, he had really joined and re-enlisted several times. In fact, he was quite patriotic, and he joined the Air Force Pararescue, which was a very special forces. They drop in behind enemy lines and rescue downed pilots, and bring either them back, their body back, or help them escape alive if they can. But he had written on the bottom, "I am not a conscientious objector," right? Because they were talking the 1960s when a lot of people didn't want to serve. So he would volunteer for service, and was quite patriotic.
Hey, Lisa. I hate to do this to you, but we've got to take a break right now. And X-Zone Nation, Lisa Story's our very special guest. This is the story of D.B. Cooper from his Neice. We'll be back on the other side of this break as the X-Zone continues with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. And you're listening to us on your hometown radio, Classic 1220 CFAJ AM in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada, streaming us at 1220.ca, classic1220.ca.
With a briefcase of secrets and a bourbon in hand, he passed a note softly. The hijack began. He said, "This ain't a game, there's a bomb in this case. Land in Seattle, do it quiet, no chase." He asked for some cash and for parachutes too, then vanished in darkness like ghosts always do. He said, "This ain't game, there's a bomb in this case. Land in Seattle, do it quiet, no chase." He asked for some cash and for parachutes too, then vanished in darkness like ghosts.
In the twilight's hush, where shadows whisper low, a silver glimmer streaks across the sky, aglow with a haunting melody. The air begins to thrum, an echo of the wonders that from beyond have come. Celestial encounter
Welcome back to the X-Zone. Lisa Story's my special guest, and we're talking about her uncle, the infamous D.B. Cooper. Sorry we had to cut you short, Lisa, because of the break, but please continue.
Sure. So I think one thing, though, that we were talking about because Walt grew up poor and dropped out of school, he had trouble getting good paying jobs and keeping them. So he took shortcuts. And, he always considered himself a Robin Hood kind of character. He tried to rob from people who had money and share it with other people, so it made him feel better about himself. But he certainly had a Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde kind of persona. And, he always said that he was very nice and personable, and he had good friends, and he could converse with them and laugh. But when it came to doing something like, whether it was in service of his country or in a crime, he would be cold, steel cold. And he always said it was two personalities. He could divorce, the words he used were divorce one personality from the other. So I think that that's probably true of a lot of people who maybe, go commit something horrible and then, go on with their life and pretend it never happened. So he had that side to him as well.
Did he ever talk to you about his time in Vietnam?
He didn't serve in Vietnam. He served in Korea. He was a little bit too old for Vietnam.
Okay.
He served, but he was mostly in Germany, stationed in Germany because he's quite young. He was 17 when he was recruited or joined. And then he was mostly, after 4 years in Germany, his service in the U.S. was based in the U.S. However, he did volunteer and go. He was part of the Berlin crisis and went overseas for a month or 6 weeks and was on site in case one of our airmen were shot down. He was on the rescue squad.
When D.B. Cooper passed away, did he ever admit to you or anyone in your family, blood family, that he in fact was D.B. Cooper?
He did. So besides the Marla Cooper letter, where he kind of hinted to it, I would keep asking him and he would deny it. And then in August 2013, he was really sick. So Mom and I went out and he was like, pack up these things, take these files. And he had me go get an envelope that was on a secret compartment behind his desk. And he said, if you don't want those, send them to Carl, but otherwise they should really stay in the family. And I didn't really look in the envelope. And he had me go he made me pack up a bunch of files with information that's really helped me tell his story. But he also had me get an envelope, and he said, can you go get that notarized in town? I'll sign it, you go get it notarized. And I'm like, well, that's not how it works, right? So you have to be there.
Yeah.
And he goes, I don't know if I can make it to town. I said, well, he goes, read it and tell me what you think. So I start reading it, and through their conversations, Carl had typed up like a 12-page, 14-page confession about I am D.B. Cooper. And it had, the cover page were all the names he went by. He had a Canadian Social Security number. I don't know why. He had a Saudi Arabian Social Security number, and he had 2 or 3 U.S. Social Security numbers. And then one of the names was, I have also gone by D.B. Cooper, Dan Cooper. And then the story, the confession, had the whole outline that this is what I did, this is how I did it, this is the person I met the night of the hijacking who gave my friend Don Brennan directions home, to where I was, and then helped me get home. So then I started talking to him. I said, this is true, you're D.B. Cooper. And he said, yes. And I'm like, why tell me now? And he said, because I'm dying. And I said, you've been saying that for years. And he goes, I mean it this time. And so we had this whole conversation, and I asked him, I said, aren't you proud of yourself? You got away with one of the most infamous crimes in our country. And he got furious. And he said, I didn't get away with nothing. And he said, I was identified, I was recruited for work overseas, and I did things that I figure I'm going to hell for. Like, he assumed, he didn't think the hijacking was a big deal. He was very calm, he was very polite to everybody.
Yes, he was, yeah.
he didn't hurt anybody. The insurance, the way he said it was, the insurance company paid the ransom, and they had gotten paid over the years from Northwest Airlines for events like this, so it was just a service. And he didn't really think about the mental anguish he caused anybody, right? So, but what he said was what happened afterwards was far worse than the hijacking, and he didn't want me to think of him as a hero or a folk hero. He thought that he had done some pretty bad things, but the hijacking in particular, I asked him why he did it, and he said because he was so destitute by that point, he just thought he was better dead than poor.
Unreal. Listen, you if I'm not mistaken, that affidavit or the article that was why your uncle wanted to get notarized, that include the confession. Was that confession ever given to the FBI?
It was. So, and it's so funny that today is the day. I just got an email from the FBI agent who sent it to the Portland FBI agent. And she's like, how are you doing? Did anything ever come of your story and of, your uncle's case? And I haven't responded yet. So my mom and I, we had a next door neighbor, and she was one of the first female FBI agents in the country years ago. And she had come back to town. She had moved away, and she was undercover. She had moved away, and she came back, and Mom and I had dinner with her. Oh my goodness, it was probably like 2 years after my uncle died, and about a month or two before or after the FBI closed the case. And we told her everything. We showed her his U.S. Foreign Service IDs, a KGB ID he had. We showed her everything and told her the whole story. And I asked if she could submit his confession to the FBI. And she said, sure, I can send it. And she goes, I'm retired now, but it is professional courtesy for one agent to, take seriously another agent's tip. So she emailed the FBI agent in Portland and said, here is a confession of somebody, a relative of a friend of mine. They are normal people. They are not crazy. She kind of, I'm paraphrasing what she said. She goes, can you please look at this? They'd really, they would just like you to look at it and see what you think. He sent it back unread and said they would close the case, or they were going to close the case, and unless I could produce, or my mom could produce one of the $20 bills or the parachute, he didn't want to read it or hear about it. And she thought that was very odd. She said, it's just professional courtesy that you take another agent's input and give it at least a cursory look. And so, so they ignored it. There was another time, too, that Carl had snuck some tissues from Walt and had them, had DNA done on them without Walt's knowledge. And he went to an attorney where he lived in Florida, and he didn't tell the attorney Walt's name. And he didn't tell him, the name of the accomplice who picked Walt up that night, who was quite a character and who the FBI interviewed as a suspect. But he said, here's this. He did the DNA report himself. He didn't send the tissues in, right? So I don't know where he got the DNA done. And the attorney sent it to the FBI in Portland and said, here's the story. Here is the DNA sequence. And the Portland agent said it doesn't match, but what was the name of the person who picked him up? And Carl always thought that was really weird, because if you don't think it's the hijacker, why would you want to know who picked him up?
Yeah.
But what was also interesting was that while Carl was waiting for the FBI to respond to his attorney, Walt called him up and said, I can't believe you DNA'd me. What are you thinking? And Carl had never told Walt, but he had a contact in the FBI that gave him a heads up before his house was raided for another issue. And, after the hijacking, he was on the radar, so they kept tabs on him. I'm not sure that's how much the FBI knew he was involved. I think it was more his intelligence work that happened afterwards.
Wow.
So, Yeah, so we tried to notify the FBI. They weren't interested. And the other thing about what we're not sure about is, according to the articles we've read and the FBI documents, they don't have full strands of DNA. They only have partial strands from 3 different individuals. And when the hijacking happened and they got rid of the cigarette butts that had saliva on it, and they never tested for blood type, even though they could have done that back then. So they got rid of that with the best DNA, and they just kept, they got some DNA off the tie, the clip-on tie. But partial DNA, and by the time they sent it in, it was almost, I think, 30 years old. And it hadn't been stored. I don't know if it was stored in a refrigerator. I doubt it. I don't think the tie was stored in a refrigerator. So we don't even know if they actually have valid DNA to find any suspect, tied to any suspect.
With the fact that there was currency involved, couldn't the U.S. Treasury Department get involved? They're part of the Secret Service and all the other aspects of the investigation, because the money was involved, and you had pretty good evidence that you knew who the suspect was and that they could actually close the case.
I didn't really think about reaching out to the Secret Service, but I've done a lot of Freedom of Information Act requests, especially I'll give you an example. He's got this KGB ID that.
All right, why don't we do this?
Really
why don't we do this? I just looked at the clock. I've got about 30 seconds before I have to take a break. So let's continue this on the other side. Fascinating conversation with the niece of the infamous D.B. Cooper. This is the X Zone. I'm Rob McConnell. We're coming to you from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. And you're listening to us on the Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, X Zone Broadcast Network, and your hometown radio, Classic 1220 CFAJ, right here in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. They stream us, 724, 325, 326, whatever. Well, they don't stream us. They stream their entire wonderful musical all-day programming. We'll be back on the other side. Whatever you do, don't go away.
With a haunting melody, the air begins to thrum, an echo of the wonders that from beyond have come. Celestial encounter as the stars align, a tapestry of wonders woven through space and time. From the void of darkness, a chorus sings so bright, mysteries unfolding in the velvet night. Through the gauze of silence, they glide
Welcome back, everyone. Lisa Story's my special guest, and we're talking this hour, well, we're kind of diving into one of the most enduring unsolved mysteries in American history. The 1971 hijacking of Northwest Orient Flight 305 by the mysterious figure known only as D.B. Cooper. But tonight, we're just not recounting the tale, Exo Nation. We're speaking with someone who has a personal connection to the legend. Joining us now is Lisa Story, the niece of the man she says was D.B. Cooper. Could she hold the missing link to one of the FBI's most baffling cases? Well, it seems that she has the entire story, including a confession, but the FBI doesn't want to know anything about it because they just want to close the case. Who knows more? All right, Lisa, what was it when you found out that the FBI were saying, that's it. No matter what you've got, we're closing the case?
I think I decided that I'd just do my own research and go through the files, and it. I guess it was disappointing, but at the same time, would they even be able to? Even if they believed his story, would there ever be enough hard evidence to physically tie it to him? I don't think the FBI was aware he was Cooper. I think that intelligence agencies knew, because I think that's how he was recruited. You know, at the time of the hijacking, he was working for a company named Vanell that had CIA contracts, but they were working on the construction of the third powerhouse on the Grand Coulee Dam in Washington. And it was, they were hiring special forces guys like my uncle, and my uncle had met the recruiter, the CIA recruiter, Phil, and kept in contact with him, and Phil got him the job at Vanell. And he told him, just hold tight, just keep working. We're working on these contracts in the Middle East. And but it was taking a couple years to get through the right process, right? But Vanell had special forces people, and this is one of the things my uncle did in the Middle East, is they trained the Saudi Arabian National Guard. They protected the oil fields in Saudi, and they also did things like respond to the Grand Mosque and Mecca siege. And my uncle said he was there as part of the Vanell crew, and that's kind of a whole nother story. But anyway, he was working for Vanell, and now I'm still going to get sidetracked and excited about this story. But anyway, and I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought. What we were talking about, how he...
You got me so involved in the story you were telling that I forgot what my question was. Hold on here. I can't remember.
Sorry. I get off on these sidetracks.
Yeah, I think we were talking about shifting the investigation from one jurisdiction to another because of all the, all the case file that you had. You had his confession, and yet the FBI didn't want to do anything about it.
Right. Okay. So that's where I was going with the Vanell story and the CIA contract. So what Walt said happened is, he limped into a cafe with a broken leg. He was soaking wet. He had his raincoat wrapped around something under his arm, and there was a guy dressed in cowboy gear and had a guitar, and he said, "Hey kid, if I call my friend, can you give him directions to where I am?" And the guy said yeah, and so his friend Don Brennan picked him up, and Don also had CIA connections. Just a couple years before, Don was he was a smoke jumper, and he and several other smoke jumpers were in Thailand on a CIA operation, right? And in fact, I think it was Don and one of his other friends that told my uncle about the CIA recruitment process in Elsinore, California, which is how he met Phil, how he got the job with Vanell. So a couple months, 4 months after the hijacking, Walt had been destitute poor. Just 18 months before, he had been evicted from a trailer because he couldn't afford $60 a month rent, right? And now he paid cash for a down payment on a house and cash for the payments, which the guy who sold him the house went on video and, talked about his impressions and how polite he was and how he paid cash and had no problem, and he paid the house off in 5 years. Going from super poor to all of a sudden, even when he still didn't have a regular job. So he was on a job site, and a couple iron workers came up to him and said, "Hey, do you want to go have a beer and talk? We're new here." And my uncle said, "Sure." He never turned down a free beer. So they went to dinner, and the guys leaned forward and said, "We know what you did. Do you want to go to jail?" And he said, "No." He goes, "Well, then you work for us, and we will call you." And they just left, right? And it's kind of similar to, how you see these things happen in movies. It was very similar to that. And then they called him a couple weeks later, and he started going to Idaho for training. A lot of it was psychological and that type of thing because he had the military training. He didn't need that. And he had the weapons training. And he had the parachute jump and all of that type of stuff. So after that, he started working overseas. So I think where the shifting investigation goes is I don't think the FBI ever identified him, but I think they did whatever intelligence units he was working for, CIA contractors, all of that. He did quite a few jobs overseas, so I think they knew he was a hijacker. That's why they approached him. Or somebody in Vanell figured it out, and they recruited him through the CIA. The vice president of Vanell was a former CIA officer, and OSS officer. And then it's just, Don Brennan picked him up. He was a smoke jumper who worked for the CIA. One of Walt's other good friends, Bob Sinclair, was in business with a guy named Jim Hall, who was CIA, and Dave Burt, who was interviewed by the FBI as a suspect and also was a smoke jumper. And then there was a guy that Bob Sinclair was friends with and in business with named Lyle Cameron. And Lyle was an FBI informant who contacted the FBI after the hijacking and said he met a guy in Elsinore a few months before the hijacking who asked about, can you jump out of a commercial airliner? And he said, sure, if there's a side door that opens in or a rear stairs. But the really interesting thing about Lyle is that he was the last person Jack Ruby spoke to on the telephone before Jack Ruby shot Lee Harvey Oswald.
So wait a second.
So
Wait a second here. Are you tying in the hijacking by D.B. Cooper into the Kennedy assassination somehow?
No. What I'm saying is he had these associations with all of these people who also had CIA or FBI informed. You know what I mean? Like, he was involved and hung with people that had all kinds of one step away that I have heart involvement in these other things, right? Art Lucier was one of his best friends and Michigan parachute team members. 8 months after the hijacking, Art was arrested with a guy named Barry Seal and a Gambino family underwrote the cost of. Yeah, so they Barry Seal was made famous by Tom Cruise in that movie American Made from the Iran-Contra scandal.
Yeah.
But Art was with Barry when they were trying on a CIA plot to overthrow Castro and get explosives to people who were going to try to overthrow Castro. His other friend, Ken Sisler, was a smoke jumper. Walt jumped with them several times. I have newspaper articles with their names together and stuff. He was CIA ops in Vietnam. He did he was in a MACV SOG unit with a guy named Ted Braden, who a lot of people right now in the D.B. Cooper world like as a suspect. But quite a few of these people, from Don, Dave Burt, Fred Bernowski, these smoke jumpers, were all interviewed within days of the hijacking as suspects. And so I think it's just so weird if you had one association with the CIA, but to have 8 or 9 people that you know personally involved, it just I think makes his story more realistic. Besides the fact that I do have U.S. Foreign Service identifications for him that are legitimate. I mean, I've researched and made sure the names of the people who signed them were in office at that time, and I have his letter from the CIA telling him, thank you for your application. We can't use your skills right now. So I have hard evidence in addition to the things that he told me and he told Carl.
Okay, you've got the letter of rejection by the CIA, but if he had been recruited at a later place in time for the CIA, wouldn't there be documentation to that as well?
Well, he wasn't recruited as an agent.
Oh, I see.
More as an asset, right? So he was a contractor. He wasn't. He had applied to try to become, to work for them, or maybe it was one of the crews that worked, in Thailand for the CIA on some of those ops. But he didn't get recruited officially. But they did use a lot. I mean, during that time frame, there's tons of books. I mean, I reference it in my book, the different newspaper articles and books where it talks about how the CIA used, third-party contractors because they could hide what they were doing from Congress that way.
Plus, they're disposable.
They're disposable.
Yeah.
And that's such a good point, because when Walt retired, he had all of these names on his resume and he had all of these identifications and did all of this work and put his life on the line, but there was no pension, right? Because you work for every company for like 1 year, or that's your cover, and you do these things and you get paid cash, and he got paid a lot of money, and he did invest some of it, but you have no pension. You just have your regular Social Security check. That's it.
And
which is not much.
And I'll bet you their medical wasn't covered after they left the service either.
No.
Yeah.
Well, because he did have veterans.
Oh, he did.
Veterans
That's right.
Administration.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, because he had served officially in the military service. But yeah.
Fascinating story. We've got one more segment. I'd love to get a lot more information out, and I want to thank you again for coming on the show. It's always a great pleasure having you with us, Lisa.
Yeah, thank you so much.
All right, Exo Nation, if you'd like to find out more about Lisa D.B. Cooper, what is your Facebook page, Lisa?
It's D.B. Cooper Story, S-T-O-R-Y.
All one word? All one word.
Yes, pretty much. And I also have that book, Better Dead Than Poor, out on Amazon that, kind of outlines all of this stuff with a lot of extensive footnotes.
All right, Lisa and I will be back on the other side of this very short break. And coming up after Lisa and I say so long in about 15 minutes from now, our number 2 of the X Zone starts for tonight and goes in right from 11 o'clock until midnight. All right, X Zone Nation. Lisa Story is my guest. We're talking about her uncle, the infamous D.B. Cooper. We'll be back on the other side of this break as we take another look at different ways of looking at this case, but I'll tell you something. I believe her. We'll be back. Don't go away.
Some days I walk, some days I crawl, some days I can't feel much at all. My body's a maze that I try to read. Every step forward, a silent need. But I won't let this break who I am. I've learned how to fight, learned how to stand. I may fall, but still I rise. Through the pain, through the tears in my eyes. This road is long, but it's mine to tread. With every sunrise, I lift my head. I won't be defined by what I can't do.
Welcome back, everyone. Lisa Story is my very special guest this hour. We're talking about her uncle, the infamous D.B. Cooper. Since you've come out with your story, how does the mainstream media taking you? Are they supporting your story? Are they trying to press law enforcement to find out how come they dropped the case? Or
No, I think when it first came out, and Carl published his book and the documentary that came out like in 2016, it did make national news. But from then, we just really didn't push it. I think we just let it. It made national news, but then you have the FBI never came out. We haven't really pursued it or looked at other ways to have him looked at officially. And I think we just let it go. Mom said it's probably just best that nobody knows anyway, right? And just best nobody thinks it's him. And I think in the forums, like there are a lot of different groups on Facebook and Reddit and different places, they discount his story because when Carl Carl interviewed him and had the recording. When they were coming out with the documentary, the producer of that documentary hired former Michigan State police officer who had a private investigation firm. He's trained by the FBI in forensic linguistics, which is telling whether or not people are telling the truth or lying. And so he went through the recordings and the printed confession, the written confession. He talked to Carl, he talked to me, he talked to the eyewitness, Jeff Osiadage, and he determined that all of us were being truthful and honest. Now, just because, like, my uncle was being truthful, he was recalling things 40, 45 years later. His memories weren't precise. What he said is that he remembered certain things, but other things, he just didn't pay attention to it. Like, in the D.B. Cooper sleuth world, amateur sleuth world, they're talking about, you know, what grain of shoe, like, what grain were his shoes, and did the eyewitness remember that? And I just think when you're talking about, I can't, if you ask me about the birth of my daughters, those were the most important events in my life. And I could tell you certain things I remember.
Yeah.
Like, I remember certain pain. Like, I remember hearing a woman scream down the hallway when I started and thinking, oh, what a wimp. And then later I was like, oh, man, that lady had something. She had, you know, she knew what was going on, right?
She sure did.
But if you ask me, yeah, right, but if you ask me other details, I don't remember them. I was in an extreme state of duress, you know, because both, you know, especially my first one was, you know, a problem. So I think that they expect, you know, when they read when Joe Koenig's wife transcribed the recordings and then he wrote his notes of where people are being truthful and not truthful with Carl and Walt, there were a couple spots where Carl and Walt were talking about, you know, what would you have done if there was no rear door? Because that was really convenient. And Carl asked him, did you choose the plane for that reason? And he said, no, I just, whatever they sold me the ticket for, which is what the Northwest Airlines ticket agent said, is he just asked for a flight to Seattle. He didn't ask what kind of plane it was, and that information was not public knowledge. So
it may not have been then, but it certainly is now. You can find out the exact.
Yeah, it is now, but right. But back then you couldn't, right? And so they're having this conversation, and Carl said, "Well, what would you have done had there been no rear door?" And Walt said, and I heard it on the recording. I played it over and over again. He said, "I would have gone out the side door." But the way it was transcribed in the book is I went out the side door. Well, even in the context of that conversation, he didn't say he went out the side door. What he was saying is that's where he would have gone out. So then what you have is these groups that are just like, well, it can't be him. Now, they believe Jeff Osiadage. He's turned out, like a lot of people have come forward and said he is a very honest person. And he was the truck driver who was playing in a cowboy band, a country band that night. He remembered that night because it was odd, and he told his family about it. They all said, oh, yeah, we remember when he told us he met this stranger soaking wet, beat red in the bar with his coat. But he was soaking wet, but he wasn't wearing his coat. It was wrapped around something, and he didn't know where he was. So he remembered that, and they remember that. Walt remembered certain details about that and how he got home, and that's how Carl was a pilot, so he looked at different flight paths. Well, in the amateur sleuth world, the fact that, you know, they're just picking apart things that my uncle said or remembered or didn't remember, right? And there are things that don't align, or there are things he doesn't remember that they're like, oh, he would have remembered that. That's a big deal. But the flight path, both the Air Force jets following Northwest Airlines lost it almost immediately, and that's in the FBI memos. And they asked for permission to tell the public that and to tell, you know, go on a news story to talk about that. They were much faster than the slow commercial jet, right? And the published flight path supposedly goes right by Mount St. Helens that was about 10,000 feet, which the plane was flying at 10,000 feet. So Carl had tracked what a normal route to Reno would have been, and it would have gone kind of east and then turned southeast at Ellensburg, near where Walt landed. He landed a little north of that. But they're saying, well, because the flight path is like set in stone, but it's not. I talked to Captain Scott's daughter and her fiance, and the fiance is a pilot. He said they didn't really know where they were. Northwest Airlines was directing them, and radar wasn't that good back then. So it's funny, like when they want certain facts to align with their story or their suspect, you know, you have to listen to what the FBI said. But when that doesn't meet what they want to say, they're like, well, ignore what the FBI said. So that's kind of it. I mean, I don't think he's a popular suspect in the D.B. Cooper world, but it doesn't matter because I really do believe him.
Yeah.
And the eyewitness is, and then you have Joe Koenig is what the former lead investigator on the Jimmy Hoffa case. You know, so this guy is not any slouch.
Is it possible, because of the work that your uncle did for the CIA and other intelligence agencies, that the FBI were told, because of his abilities and the missions that he may have been on or are continuing on, the FBI would have been told to shut the file down?
I definitely think that's possible. And I actually found several newspaper articles, even from like the 1970s, where the FBI said, if we're looking into somebody and the CIA tells us they're an asset, stop the investigation, we do. So that's actually been printed as far back as the 1970s, 1980s. So, and I had found a few of those articles. So, yeah, I think it's absolutely possible.
So do I, especially with all the information that you have, all the evidence, all the interviews. That's the only reason I can see, as a former police officer myself, for an investigation being shut down.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So what's new? What are you up to next? Are you doing more lectures, more speaking, writing another book or two?
I think I spent over 11 years on this book and really trying to, like, go through the FBI files and go through my uncle's files,
right,
and document things so people don't think I'm just making stuff up, that they see why I have pulled these lines together and tell the story. But I think the next book I write will be fiction. It'll be just for fun. Because this has been really intense. I've spent more than 10 years on this, and I think it's time for me to have my own adventures and not write about my uncles anymore. I think it's just time to move on. And I just don't think anyone cares. I don't think the authorities care to identify who the real D.B. Cooper is. And the only people who care are, you know, unsolved mystery fans.
Yes.
And they'll never believe anybody. You know, unless you could come up with the $20 bill, I don't think they believe it was the hijacker.
There's a point. Your uncle was a collector of things. Why wouldn't he keep a couple of his $20 bills around as trophies?
Because he didn't want to go to jail. I mean, he was destitute and he needed money. He spent the money. He put some of the money in a Canadian bank just north of Sumas, that entry up there. People talk about that. He didn't brag about this crime. He didn't brag about any of his crimes, ever. He didn't keep anything from any crime. The only thing he kept from this one were the long johns that he wore, even though they never fit again. But that could never really be tied to the crime, right? If you keep one of the 20s, even years later, you're going to jail. And that's why I told him, don't sign the confession. I don't care that you're sick and you're 80. They'll send you to jail for the rest of your life.
So the confession was never signed.
Right.
That's a good.
I talked him out of it. My mom and I talked him out of it.
So the
Carl was not
FBI,
happy with it.
so the FBI never did receive a signed confession from your uncle.
No, but he's on recording. You know what I mean? They have the recording of his voice as well, talking about it.
All right.
So.
Let our listeners know what your Let our listeners know
Yeah.
what your Facebook page is.
Pardon me?
Let our listeners know how they can find you on Facebook.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's
I'm on
okay.
Facebook on D.B. Cooper Story, And I have a lot of the documents and photos of my uncle and different letters and stuff like that they can see. So, D.B. Cooper story.
Lisa, I want to thank you again. Always great talking to you. Continued success. And I, for one, hope one day there'll be a knock at the door and there'll be the FBI saying, you were right about who D.B. Cooper was. Take care of yourself, Lisa.
Thank you.
Exo Nation, Lisa Story has been our guest. We've been talking about the D.B. Cooper case. I'll be back on the other side of this break as the X Zone continues with yours truly, Rob McConnell, from our broadcast center and studios in St. Catharines, Ontario, Canada. You're listening to us on the Talkstar Radio Network, Mutual Broadcast Network, X Zone Broadcast Network, and on your hometown radio, Classic 1220 CFAJ AM, and they stream us around the world on classic1220.ca. We'll be back with Hour 2 in a very short while. I mean very short, maybe 40 seconds, 50 seconds, I don't know. But I guarantee you it'll be short.